So first off, I was going to kind of start with a background of the CleanStart or the CleanTech trailer.
Okay, that's fine.
So in 2019, we were approached by the Dean of Engineering at the College of Engineering and Computer Science at Sac State to build a trailer that he wanted to be able to take in the community that everyone could kind of rally around CleanTech. And as I mentioned, that's, we went out and bought the trailer to really make that happen, but then everything kind of closed down. So we were kind of faced with this uphill battle of how do we, really enable this trailer and be ready for when things kind of come back. So in the past year, through the CMC and through City of Sacramento's investment in some of the job programs, I'll make sure you say the names so I don't get them all wrong.
Okay.
This trailer was put together and fabricated at the CMC. I'm told it's the first thing that was built at the CMC.
Yeah.
The first thing built at the CMC with the City of Sacramento, the CMC, SMUD, CleanStart, and a whole host of partners to bring the community together around clean energy and this energy transition. And we all hear about the possibilities of the energy transition, of it bringing great, better living communities, increased economic prosperity and all those things. But what you really need to have that to really activate that and take advantage of it is a community and a government and organizations that back that up. So I wanted to let Kriztina tell, I guess, the CleanStart trailer story from her perspective from this summer, and tell us what you've been working on with the city around the energy transition.
Sure. Thank you again for allowing me to speak today. So I want to start by saying that workforce development is brand new for the City of Sacramento. My position, my role has only been in existence for about 3 years now, and it started because the Brookings Institute did a report on Sacramento back in 2018, basically saying that we are not doing a good job of tapping into our talent, and especially our marginalized and vulnerable communities that have a wealth of talent. And so based on that report, the city mayor and council allocated quite a bit of money in a new inclusive economic and community development initiative, which is how my position got started. And again, that was in 2019. And towards the end of 2019, fast forward, as Thomas said, the pandemic hit. Governments across the country got a bunch of money through the CARES federal grants. I was allocated $10 million to basically invest in workforce development programs. A few months before the allocation, I had met with a team of CMC staff, and they had taught us about the concept. I wasn't necessarily on the trip with all the dignitaries that went to Germany, but did learn quite a bit. Did learn quite a bit on the concept and how the city's funding could really help support some of the hiring goals. So fast forward, we received the $10 million. We allocated to about 29 different programs, CMC being one of those programs. And during that time of the first year, 2020, of our workforce portfolio, I was also pulled into some conversations with some colleagues about the city launching a new building electrification ordinance, which somewhat indirectly coincides. And so I wasn't necessarily focused on environmental jobs when I first started the portfolio, but as our portfolio expanded, environmental and particularly clean and green workforce pathways became a big priority for the city of Sacramento. So much so that because of the great success of the training program for CMC, which produced the trailer, we are looking into, for the ARPA dollars that the city just got from the federal government, which is close to about $10 million. We're trying to carve out a significant chunk of that funding for pathways that lead into the clean and green workforce space, because we know that many of those jobs are lead to really good wages and can change the economic trajectory of some of our marginalized and vulnerable communities. We also have learned, though, through our CARES portfolio that there are some major educational needs for our marginalized communities, because oftentimes what our workforce nonprofits found was that, and particularly some of the nonprofits that CMC actually subcontracted with, they could not meet the reading and math components of the training program. And so we're trying very hard to ensure that our funding this time around is going to address some of those gaps and issues, so that we can see young people and families and parents get into some of these, again, higher wage, high demand jobs. We've also commissioned a national data collection company, MZ / Burning Glass, to look at the high growth, high demand industries. We have a special report or analysis that's being done just on clean and green jobs, which once that report is done, I can definitely share with you, Thomas, and share with the membership. But we're very much taking this seriously, hearing from some of the CMC students and grantees about how much they appreciated not only the trailer being built, but the interaction with the communities was a really big deal for us at the city. My colleague, Jennifer Venema, which I'm sure she'll come in and speak at a later point, has really impressed upon me the importance of workforce development and how we can really, again, change the trajectory of our communities through some of our clean and green new strategies and efforts. So I'll stop there, but I just wanted to give you all that context.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I think that was a good kind of summary of all the stuff that's going on. And one thing that, we've talked about at past CleanTech meetups is connecting and basically kind of bringing the community together to work on things. And as we all kind of know, like if you're going for let's say a government grant or any sort of grants like that, you need to bring kind of a community together to be able to go after them. And you've brought a community together to work on these green programs and things like that. So can you kind of share with me who's the community that you kind of brought together on it, and what were some of the ways that you really brought them together that people could learn from?
Great questions. So it actually started in 2020. Council member, now Mayor Pro Tem Eric Guetta, he wanted to have a climate justice and jobs summit. And he approached Jennifer Venema, who then approached me. And the city started a Clean and Green Workforce Pathways Roundtable series to prepare for that summit. And there were about 4 meetings that we hosted, and literally, because I wasn't very familiar with, again, the environmental community, nor the Clean and Green organization. So I relied heavily on Jennifer's network, as well as word of mouth. Some of the nonprofit providers that I had been working with also had recommendations. And I think our first meeting probably consisted of about maybe 50 individuals, representing maybe about 25 different entities, and it grew over time. And now we're at the second iteration of that group. And this year, because of the building electrification ordinance of the city, we've been tasked with coming up with some recommendations and suggestions that can be presented to council at the end of this year on how to develop and have a much more coordinated workforce pipeline and pathways into clean and green jobs. And again, this is going to be based on the jobs will be based on the data that we're getting from the MZ Burning Glass company. So we just had our first meeting last month. We have our next meeting on April 27th. If any of you are interested in participating in this whole workforce pipeline discussion and pathway discussion, please let me know. Would love to include you. Especially
those of you that were talking about buildings too, yes. Because the job training for the is going specifically for the greening of the buildings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And as I've shared with my colleagues, this electrification ordinance, which is, I think, fantastic, and we definitely need it. There's also some politics involved that I think we're trying to work through on the community side, especially as it relates to existing buildings and existing homes that, they may be dilapidated and have other issues going on that need to be addressed first before we can retrofit for electrification. And so that's some of the debate that's happening right now that we're trying to think through. Yes, we're grateful that these job opportunities will generate revenue and salaries and income for our families, but if their homes are already in bad shape, how do we address those issues and also get them electrified? So those are some of the things we're trying to work through right now as well at the city, and has come up in this Clean and Green working group. So if you want to participate in that conversation, please, again, join us.
How should they reach out to you?
My email is probably the best way, and I can, and I'm sorry I do not have cards, but I give it to you, Thomas, and you can
you can email me. I can always connect you with her. Now, one of, as many of us know, the air quality in Sacramento is pretty abysmal. And the places that are really heavily impacted are places near freeways, airports, which are also usually underserved areas of our community. That we're trying to look at supporting this. So when it comes to kind of, I guess, how you're measuring, the electrification and the air quality, are you guys looking at any new metrics or anything there to kind of? I know there was a hackathon recently too around it. Valley Vision and Walk Sacramento. They're not called Walk Sacramento.
I can't remember what they're called now.
Yeah, our board member runs it, so she's gonna be mad.
Oh no! I would say the metrics Jennifer Venema will definitely have. What I have been involved in, there was an environmental justice group that the city planning department helped to create a few years ago. So I've been involved in those conversations to address that very issue in our marginalized and vulnerable communities. And because public transportation is very difficult in Sacramento, we have been trying to also create or start somewhat of a social enterprise, if you will, and or working with existing startup nonprofits that are trying to address transportation. I know that CleanTech and also Paratransit and Pride Industries, they also have some transportation programming, workforce development programming that we're trying to tap into, so that we can have either some kind of shuttle system and trying to get some of the cars off the road so that there could be more carpooling. The city also did receive a grant, I think it's called the Blueprint EV grant from the Volkswagen lawsuit. I've been indirectly involved in that as well. California Conservation Corps members are, their teams will go out and help to stand up a number of the EV charging stations sprinkled throughout Sacramento. And so once we started having those conversations, we started talking about, okay, how do we continue beyond just this funding from Volkswagen to again educate and get more of our communities, particularly our communities of color, to utilize and move towards more EVs. So that's something else that's in process or in progress with this working group.
So, let's talk kind of optimism in the future. What do you hope all this will kind of bring? What do you hope to see in the next year with these programs?
Another great question. I would say more of, again, tapping into that unidentified talent in our communities, particularly our communities of color, our marginalized and vulnerable communities. I would love to see, from a workforce perspective, I'm very focused on how do we move families and people out of poverty, and how do we get them into high wage, long-term jobs. And in my research and analysis of the clean and green sectors and industries, there are phenomenal job opportunities and careers that can last an entire lifetime. And so how do we tap into those opportunities, but how do we help people stay in those jobs? How do we keep them in those jobs for years, time over time? And so it's about sustainability on the workforce side, and how do we work with the clean and green community to really build those workforce training programs that are going to lead to, again, sustainable careers.
So that you'll start seeing sustainable careers, or at least people on that pathway by the end of the year. So then I guess for my last question before we turn it to anyone who might have a question in the audience is, what, as a CleanStart and CleanTech community that we have here at CleanStart, what can we do to help you?
Another great question. I think knowing about either job opportunities, training opportunities, joining the working group, the city's Clean and Green working group, if you have the time and the interest. What we're trying to do with this working group is also understand all the education that's needed, all the credentialing that's needed, and how do we get our families and young people exposed to those opportunities, but then how do we get them enrolled and because the other piece of it is we're realizing there's got to be the interest, there's got to be motivation, and how do we, there's been conversations with some of the maker spaces throughout the city around trying to expose young people at an earlier age to these kinds of opportunities that can lead to, again, long-standing careers. So really helping the city understand what are, again, the training, workforce opportunities, and then also how do we support individuals that may not have any environmental background or experience, and how do we support them as they grow into these kinds of jobs.
All right. Does anyone have a question for Kriztina? Gary.
So, one discussion we've had here a number of times is on the possibility of community resource projects, community energy projects. Because for a lot of people in our clean tech sector, they're eager to deploy their technologies, and they're eager to do it in even demonstration programs so they can show you what they can do. Bob has a technology, for example. Instead of installing, a $10,000 battery system to take advantage of the lower rates off peak, he's got something that's less than a tenth of the cost of that. It's very doable for the disadvantaged communities, and it's portable. So that means if you're a renter, you can take it with you. So we can see for the community of companies, they'd like to lend a hand and get some experience with the technologies. But there's a logic to saying, we're going to focus on these 6 blocks and focus the old weatherization money, which is available through government. We're going to focus on new money, which is available from the utilities. But organizing something where you can actually, redo a fairly substantial area and then hire local people and train them how to do that, and we can replicate that around the city. Is that something you're talking about in your clean and green tech discussions?
We have not yet, but we would love to have that conversation be included, because we very much would like to suggest to mayor and council the funding. I have some funding right now to do workforce training that is ARPA dollars. It's one-time funding. It'll expire at the end of 2024. So beyond that, we will need ongoing funding from mayor and council. So I would definitely love to have that conversation brought into the clean and green workforce.
I think we'd like to bring that conversation to you.
Great.
As a very specific way that, it would be real jobs. You're helping people that don't have the best insulated or the most efficient lighting homes, and find a way to get that done that isn't a huge burden on them. Mm-hmm. But now you've trained people as electricians, as carpenters, as dealing with plumbing things, and that has a way of growing on itself. So
right.
That's a virtuous circle approach to it that we think we can get started here.
And we would love that. I'll say I was part of a study mission with UC Davis back in 2019, and we went to Cleveland to look at their anchor institution initiative, and they built a very robust public-private partnership strategy, training and driving local residents to their healthcare system because of all the teaching hospitals, all the academia that they have there. And I had mentioned to a colleague on the trip that we have something similar on the trades and construction side in Sacramento because there's so much housing being built. There's so much manufacturing here. Well, manufacturing is definitely growing. But we just don't have all of the pieces coming together yet. And I think that's exactly what the City of Sacramento is trying to do, is be that conduit, that glue. We know we don't have all the answers and we know we don't have all the funding, but if all of our partners came together and we started working towards a joint vision, a shared goal, I think that's where we could start seeing some huge impact in our communities that desperately need these opportunities.
Well, I agree. I think the insight that we've talked about among ourselves is don't try to do too much too fast, because we need something that immediately is a success and we can build on that. If we try to do all of downtown Sacramento in a project, it's just too complicated. But if we had 6 blocks, 10 blocks, nothing succeeds like success.
And I'll just add one more thing. So I grew up in Del Paso Heights, although I left to go to school in San Francisco, and I got my social work degree at SF State. So I'm a very people person, very community minded. But when I moved back from the Bay Area to Sacramento and saw that Del Paso Heights looked worse than when I left, that was soul crushing for me. And I think at this point, this is what I've shared with my colleagues in the environmental justice space as well, that Del Paso Heights, the Manors, the Flats, which are neighborhoods that are adjacent to Del Paso Heights, North Sac, Meadowview, there are very specific communities that need to see tangible results that are really helping their communities and their neighborhoods grow and thrive and improve aesthetically. I mean, Marysville Boulevard, when I was a kid, my grandparents used to take me down Marysville Boulevard, and it was just amazing. This was early 80s, and the business quarter was just thriving. You go there now, and it's so dilapidated. And it's very, very sad to see. And so I'm trying to also, I have a little bit of a bias, so I try and, utilize some of the programming that we're doing to target those areas that don't have the same level of resource or support. I'm also working with the Aggie Square project, and there's a very large workforce development initiative there. Whatever we do there, we're trying to replicate in these other parts of the city that desperately need the same level of attention. So would love to talk more and invite, again, anybody that wants to be a part of our working group to implement some of those pieces. Well, thank you again for letting me come and speak, and let me know if you're interested in joining our working group. Thank you.
Thank you.